Welcome to another episode of Insights from the Trenches, a series dedicated to helping ADHD couples thrive by empowering couples with insights from ADHD experts and ADHD peers. I'm Alice, your host. In this episode, I'm joined by Sasha Podolsky, founder of FindUrMeds. After discovering he had ADHD in college and working as a product manager at Google, Sasha turned his own struggles finding medication into a mission to help others access the prescriptions they need. So grab a cup of coffee and let's thrive together.
So hi, Sasha. It's good to see you today. Thank you for joining this episode of Insight from the Trenches. Can you share a little bit about yourself and your ADHD journey?
Sure. Well, hi, Alice. Hi, everyone. My name is Sasha. I'm an ADHDer. I'm a founder of FindUrMeds. I'm a technologist. I was at Google and Instacart before going into startups. My ADHD journey probably started in college when I became a bit more aware as to what was cooking inside my brain. I think, and it wasn't until mid-20s where I really started dealing with it. Ironically, neurodivergence gives you a lot of spikes and that allow you to do some things really well and some things less well. And the spikes let me power through some of the more difficult areas in college. And it wasn't until trying to handle a lot of details in a corporate job, having a lot of communication with other people, and having, I would say, like a daily feedback loop where those, maybe a clinical way of saying that, deficits became more clear. And so I'd had a neuro eval for a while, but then started trying to educate myself on what was going on through a variety of different dimensions, everything from medicine to just habits to some. I had a therapist for a while, but trying to just put together what was going on, because it's not like things are more of a spectrum than a black and white area. A lot of different neurodivergent, I guess technically maybe it's called a disorder, but conditions have comorbidity rates. In other words, that they're related, and so it's not this and it's not that. But it's an exciting journey to make sense of, to put a storyline as to why maybe one thing was going really well in your life and one thing was going less well, and then how to move forward with acceptance, but also understanding how to feel, I would say, some of the things you don't do as well. And that's a complicated balance to keep.
So you found out you had ADHD when you were in college, if I hear that correctly.
Yeah, in terms of the literal diagnosis, I think it was more of a gradual process, understanding what that exactly meant, with understanding some of the deficits, the weaknesses from that, because college insulates you in a way. It's just you doing work independently, not needing to work with others as much, and you have less immediate frequency. By that, I mean, if you're bad with details, but you always clean that up and have a great paper, and then you do that once a month, that's different than working in a company where you're interacting with people daily.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. You also just mentioned when you were talking, when you were in product management, you weren't medicated. What drove you to decide to start medication?
A persistent mom. And three things, honestly. A persistent mom, becoming a bit more mature and responding with less ego. When I thought about medication, I thought of crazy people and people who have to take medicine because there's something fundamentally wrong with them. This is the way I looked at it in my earlier 20s. And I responded with, like, it felt like a personal attack or rejection of, like, oh, I'm not good the way I am. I mean, I sympathize with the response, but I think as I got older, I didn't think about it as reactively. Like, I'm wearing a sweater today. It's cold outside. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It's just that I'm wearing a sweater because it helps go through the day-to-day. And I think medicine can be like that. It can be just like a sweater where it's helpful in allowing you to do what you want to do. And when you think about it like that, it goes, what if things could be better? What if it helps? What if there's nothing wrong? It's just like I'm wearing a sweater because it's a valid choice. And at the same time, I think it was a combination of being less aware, not medicated, and in a role that really involved a high degree of detail and coordination that I was pretty bad at. And so, like, fast forward 6 years, I'm more aware of these things. I take medicine. I also use AI, which is really, really helpful for, where did I drop what details am I missing? Help me spell this, help me do that, which helps not cover up, but helps you figure out a lot of those weaknesses.
Got it. So I'm glad to hear that there was a transitional period to figure out and you started taking medication. Did you run into any challenges of filling your prescription?
Yeah, definitely. The inception for FindUrMeds, the original inspiration started with struggling to get my own meds. In 2023, was it? I hired someone abroad to help call pharmacies because it was just a suck of my time and it was making it more challenging and difficult. And then in 2025, with technology changing, it was easier to build out a solution that would help do the calling, that would help build out like a one-person business. One advantage of AI is if you have a lot of creativity, but you have more of an executional challenge in terms of getting all these things to get together, AI is pretty helpful in helping you implement your ideas pretty quickly and helping you fill in the gaps if you can provide the scaffolding. So it was a nice confluence of technology with intent, with a problem that was worth solving.
Got it. Well, I have to say, before you created FindUrMeds, it was pretty ingenious to hire someone to call the pharmacy for you. That still didn't solve the problem? Wow. Tell us more.
Well, just by degrees. One person can, for 6 hours of calling pharmacies, that gets tiring. But it was a helpful step in the right direction.
Got it. So is it because of this experience that helped you got started with FindUrMeds?
It was that experience, and it was also I tried to raise funding for a broader company that was helping kind of be like a Grammarly, but for speech and persuasion and sales. I thought that was really interesting, but it was also something that I needed funding for that was a bit more outside of my control. Mm-hmm. After that, I tried getting funding I could, and I pivoted to something that was much more niche, that I could own every piece of, that I was really familiar with the problem. And so when I tell people about FindUrMeds, I tell them that I'm a patient first, business owner second. That I'm familiar with the frustration on this, and that I'm not doing this to make a quick dollar, but more to solve a problem, to hopefully solve it well in a way that other people feel comfortable getting value from it and also just paying me for that value, and trying to do both those things like fairly and thoughtfully.
Got it. So I do have a lot of listeners that are non-ADHD partners, and a lot of us, if they're not familiar with ADHD, doesn't understand how challenging it is to have an ADHD partner go and fill a prescription. Can you share a little bit about the challenges that you went through as an ADHDer of trying to fill your medication?
I think there are a couple of problems. The first is just about supply and stock. There's something like 300 plus medicines in the United States that are seen as being in shortage, according to the FDA. And for each of those medicines, a doctor can't just recommend whatever pharmacy you pick up your medicine nearby the same way you do, like if you're picking up antibiotics when you're sick. And the pharmacies don't share their stock, especially not for controlled substances, which ADHD and stimulants tends to favor a lot of. Now, that's not to vilify them. It's because they are controlled substances. There's obligations that any pharmacy needs to follow seriously, and they're trying to do their job well and compliance well in both like whatever company they work for, like a chain pharmacy is an independent pharmacy, and also the government. But that creates a complication, especially if you're an ADHD patient, because there's no way of getting stock other than you or someone authorized on behalf of you, like a partner, an authorized business in this case, to call those pharmacies again and again and again, sometimes 40, 50, 60 pharmacies, which is a lot if you think about the average call, let's say, is 10 minutes, that's 600 minutes. Let's say if you go 50 pharmacies, and sometimes we've seen patients go over 100 pharmacies. So that's, let's say if it's 50, that's 8.5 hours calling pharmacies every month to find your medicine, which is like you need. It's not a luxury. So that's the first thing, stock, just finding the stock. The second thing I think is remembering, because the sequencing is a little bit hairy in the sense that usually most patients have a 30-day script. So every 30 days they can get filled. But we have to think back from, it might take 2 or 3 days to find the medicine. And then after you find the medicine, you need to relay that onto your provider and have them actually go and call that medicine in, confirm it's still in stock because maybe it's out of stock, and then you yourself go to the pharmacy. So that's a lot of timing things to keep in your head. And so another issue is thinking about, like, okay, if I pick it up today, on Friday, March 6th, when do I need to think about getting my medicine again? And as we help both ADHD customers and non-ADHD customers, a lot, as I said, over 300 plus medicines are in shortage, and I think the majority of them are not ADHD medicines, but obviously ADHD is pretty well known, and a lot of the ADHD medicines are in shortage, but not all shortage medicines are for ADHD, if that makes sense. But anyway, It's a population that is not as good cognitively with working out timing and details, which compounds to the problem. I think the third thing is really price, especially because the shortages. Sometimes independent pharmacies that will generally take less insurance or no insurance will keep the medicine stocked. And so then an ADHD patient is in a situation of, maybe I was a little late on remembering that I needed to find my medication. Now I finally found it. It's $400. What do I do? So all those create a bit of a conundrum and are just making what is always going to be somewhat of a tedious process is unnecessarily difficult. But I don't want to vilify any party of this, from the patient who's trying to get their medicine and the doctor who is trying to treat hundreds of people, each with their own complexity, from the pharmacist who is filled with scripts and also needs to ensure that they're complying with what's required to dispense drugs. So it is just an unfortunate confluence rather than any intentional party trying to make something overly difficult.
Yeah, so you've touched on a few things, right? So for the ADHD partner, having the focus and to locate a list of pharmacies and to make those calls to see if they have the medication in stock, it's quite challenging because it's a very mundane and very boring task, but it needs to be done, right? And then once, let's say, you find a pharmacy, then that pharmacy might not be in network. So now you're stuck with a very expensive medication and you have to decide if you're going to fill it or not. And to add on top of that, what you said was, if you have to refill it every 30 days, you literally have to restart the cycle again. And that could take days for you to do any of this, if not take 6 months to try to call multiple pharmacy. That's crazy and insane.
I think hopefully the DEA will take steps to help alleviate the shortage. I think from my knowledge, in the medium term, it's here to stay. But that hopefully towards the end of 2020s, it'll be in a better situation. But unfortunately, it is here to stay. And so the burden usually falls on the patient for getting their medicine. And as I said, or as I say to doctors, that we hope that no one needs our product because it's already a frustration. But if you do, we'd love to help.
Yeah, so tell me about your company, FindUrMeds. Tell me a little bit more of how that solves these problems, because like you said, the main responsibility falls within the patient. And in our situation is someone that has ADHD, but there's also a problem to solve with the doctor that is prescribing and the inventory information for the pharmacy. But let's go through it one at a time. Let's talk
Sure.
about how FindUrMeds helps with people that are looking to fill prescription but realize their current pharmacy doesn't have stock. How does it help them fill the medication?
Sure. We have the same medicines that GoodRx has. GoodRx is a great product for getting discounts on medicines, but we make it easy for a patient to input their medicine, a couple key pieces of information about themselves. So where they're located, their birthday, phone number, and also when they need the medicine. Because as I said, the timing is really important. Having a quick turnaround, and we try to get through about 90% of our patients. We can find stock on them in about a day or two. And what we'll do is make it easy for a patient to input the information and start a medicine search. And then we will call about between, I say, 50 and 100 pharmacies to find their medicine. And when we do, we'll quickly share that with the patient. And if the patient consents with the provider, meaning that there's one less game of telephone for them to solve because we've already sent the medicine information to their doctor, which is like something that people can forget.
So did you say that you will share the information with their doctor also, that you found the medication at this particular pharmacy? Is that what you were mentioning, sharing the information to the doctor?
Yeah, share the stock information. If the patient consents, because what happens normally is if I relay to you that I found your medicine in a given pharmacy, well, you're still the patient. You can't prescribe that medicine. So you're going to share that with your doctor, which is another game of telephone. And any link in the game of telephone creates complications down the road. For instance, if you forget to relay that onto your provider, or you relay it late, maybe 5 days later, chances are the medicine that we found stock on is gone, which means we're going to have to start this process up again. And that's just a pain for everyone involved. So we try to simplify as many steps as possible. And we also try to do it quickly and do it on time to maximize the chance that on our first go, we can find the medicine and let people get it and do bigger and better things with their time than try to deal with medicine inventory.
So you solve the medicine inventory by automating, calling all these pharmacies and figure out what they have in stock. How do you deal with the pricing issue? Because when you were talking about the challenge of an ADHD or trying to find their medication, there's a component of you can find the medication. Once you find the medication, that might be a very expensive medication. And you might have to make that decision if you purchase it or not. So how does FindUrMeds help solve that pricing issue?
Well, so first, to your point on calling, we use a combination of humans and also automate those calls. Especially, we will use humans more when we have to call something really manual or difficult, or let's say a patient has only a specific manufacturer that works with their body. As for the price, there's not a magic wand I can wave to produce more medicine at a given pharmacy. What I can do is I first of all surface what I find to patients. So example, earlier today I was emailing a patient named Cesar. I found his medicine at a pharmacy in New York and it cost $184, which is a lot. And I've told him and another patient that right now he could go pick up that medicine right now, which I know is steep, or I can keep looking, and I'd like to keep looking. Looking takes me time, and find his medicine more cheaply. I try to give it a good shot, and I also just surface that trade-off to patients because sometimes they have different set of preferences. For some, trying to do their job without their medicine is really, really complicated, and that extra, if it's going to take me 2 days to find their medicine and it's cheaper versus finding it today, it matters. They care about getting the medicine now. But I try to both be proactive, let patients know so they can figure out what decision works for them, and search diligently to give it a strong shot that we will try to find their medicine. Because we're calling a lot of pharmacies, which usually can solve the trick, but it's not completely a magic wand as much as I wish it were.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm glad to hear that there is also a human intervention steps if it needs to be. so that you can help. It's not just automated, here's the information. It sounds
Right.
like when you find the information, let's say if there's stock and there's a cost, you would actually share that immediately with the prescriber and the patient. And then it's a decision step that they make at that point to fill the prescription or not. Or you might actually reach out to them and say, hey, if you give me a little bit more time, I'll look for more pharmacy for you and see if we can find you lower price.
Totally.
Just to do the first piece, from the time they gave you some information, so you can, in your system, can start looking for pharmacies that can fill the prescription. How long does it take for you to tell them you found the medication and they can fill it right now? How long does it usually take?
It's usually between an hour and 2 days. It varies based on how many calls we're doing. And there's a lot of variance between cities. Point one, cities can take a little more time to a rural location. I think that in cities, it's particularly challenging. Well, it's more challenging because when you have more patients, you have more of a standard amount of people who need a whole bunch of different medicines, ensuring that there's a pharmacy in the city, there will be demand for that. And so I would say on average, there's more calls. Not to say we don't help patients in cities. The majority of our patients are all in cities. But I have noticed that if I'm looking, say, in rural Pennsylvania versus New York, on average, I guess that rural Pennsylvania, I'll find medicine faster. But it depends on the medicine, depends on the location, potentially the time of year. For instance, allergies and asthma, that's another whole class of medications that can run in shortage. And obviously, those tend to be worse during, say, pollen season than they do in winter.
Got it. But it's still a good thing, right? From within a day and a couple of hours to like in 2 days. It's better than having an ADHD or trying to make calls themselves that could be distracted and then they got call away and try to come back and do this task, because at least they get the information. Because it's not about the process, about finding medication. It's about you get the medication.
Right.
So how do you decide you're doing a more extended search versus stopping at where it is? Is it when the client said, hey, it's great that you found my prescription, but it's too expensive? Is there like a decision point there that they have to make that triggers that extended search? Or do you have a certain criteria that you have in your system so that even though you send the information, you give the decision or give the information to the patient that you can do an extended search for them, and then they can decide if they want to do it or not?
There's two parts to our policy. One is that I'll always let patients know if I find their medicine, because I've realized in the past that something I would think is too expensive, a patient would still want. The second one is calling at least 100 pharmacies in an ongoing effort and updating them. We rarely get past 100. Then it's a case by case of, we can continue through this a couple of days, I can refund you. That happens less than 5% of the time. And being proactive with patients, I've realized that you want to communicate with your customers and you also want to show that you are attentive to their needs and not forgetting about them. That obviously, if a patient is in the dark as to, oh, you found something, but it's too expensive, etc., they don't know you from online service. They're gonna have their doubts, which is natural, because you just paid money to some service that you hope might solve things. So the best antidote to this is to communicate pretty thoughtfully, proactively, transparently as to what's going on and how, and try to be a patient's friend the way I'm a patient myself, the way I want someone to treat me. And so that means spending more than what a patient pays when they give them search. I'm trying to find patients who want to stick with me for the long term. And so I will eat a loss on searches to try to find medicine, to make our relationship based on trust and respect and helping achieve common goals, and just being honest with patients about if something's not working, what's not working, and what I intend to do to make it right.
So I think that's very helpful to understand how your services work, that you will do an extended search. I think that's very important. So very respectful of the patient. You talked about that you also work with medical professionals, like the people that are filling the prescription. How does your platform work with them?
So the difference for providers is that we have a provider section of the site where providers can configure a certain medicine search for their patients. So the providers that like this tend to be more either in pediatrics or especially some ADHD providers. Let's say that they are working with a forgetful patient who can't remember the exact name of the medicine. Or maybe she takes a generic medicine, which has a long chemical name, and she just can't remember it on the top of her mind. We make it so that a provider can log in and without entering any personal information, because providers have to be mindful of what they're sharing. The provider can say, I'm configuring a medicine search for Alice for X medicine in this zip code. But the provider, to be clear, they won't enter a name. They'll just say, here's a medicine, here's a search, and here's a location to do it in. And then they'll share that with you, the patient, who can fill that out. The difference is that you won't be selecting the exact medicine, dosage, quantity. All that stuff has been done by your doctor so that you can just enter the information you need, and then we will search for it and then let both the doctor and the patient know. And some providers prefer that because they want to have a sense of trust and reliability that we're helping them locate the right medicine and helping them in a very simple, transparent, easy to understand way, because doctors are inundated with tech and some of it just creates more complication. And the last thing they need is another buzzing app message notification code. They just need a solution to the problem. And so that's what we try to do, as well as do things like label, is this medication brand or is it generic, and what's the equivalent? So that if a parent or a patient is looking at the medicine and they see some long, weird name, they can go, that's the generic version of this. Okay, that matches what Dr. Smith prescribed.
This is pretty interesting. So there are two things that you brought up that was very interesting. Number one is before they fill the medication, the prescriber could already look through FindUrMeds, figuring out which pharmacy in this zip code has the medication before they submit the prescription. And the reason why I'm asking is, okay. And the reason why I'm asking that is that in California, we all do electronic prescription now. We don't have written prescription. Maybe the other states still write prescription. So if it's in California, I'm assuming that they could search for it, figure out which pharmacy has the medication, and then send the prescription there.
We usually recommend, which is that it's best to figure out where your medicine is and then send a prescription in quickly after. Then you could prescribe to your default pharmacy, learn that they're in stock at some point later, and then try to search for it, which usually creates a lot more of a headache because you're requiring basically two things. One, CVS, Walgreens, Duane Reade, whatever, they email you saying, hey, we got your prescription from your provider. We don't have it. That can happen maybe a day later. Okay, so we've lost a day now. Then you have to physically search for the medicine. Okay, now it's been another 2 days. And you have to let the provider know. And if the providers wouldn't walk with me on this math, if the provider's prescribing on, call it, on the 30th day, like when it's actually due, that means we're now saying like 4 or 5 days in between prescriptions trying to get this all together, which creates a confusion.
Got it. This is interesting. So do the prescriber pay you a fee to do that search, or this is something that they can do on your site at no cost?
The patient, in most cases, always pays for the search. The provider can configure medicine for their patients. Because as I tell both parties, we're trying to be helpful. We know that the patients, there's enough complicated interactions between the patient, the provider, and the pharmacy, and we're trying to make those interactions as seamless as possible. And so, yes, we do need to be paid. It's a business, but I'm trying to solve a problem. That's the point of having a business, which is why we make all the provider-related software. And that if a provider wants to pay for let's say that they're self-pay, and that and I've had this happen some, where a provider says, I have such a pain in the butt trying to keep all my patients organized on medicine. I'd like to pay you. We can work that out directly. But the majority of patients and providers find it easiest, where the doctor will elect the medication that is being searched, and then the patient will enter their personal information that we use to verify the prescription and also pay for it, is the best division of labor. We're always open to learning what works, and my partner, I say, if there's something you want, let me know and we'll build it.
If someone is struggling to fill their ADHD prescription today, what is one practical insight or mindset that you can share with them now that you've filled many prescriptions for a lot of people?
I think plan ahead, cut yourself some slack, and try to simplify your life with things that reduce the amount of details, mundane stuff, cognitive load that you deal with.